my pleasure to introduce this month's speaker, Ken McCullough. He's an ordained and retired pastor. Ken is a graduate of Milligan College and Vanderbilt Divinity School. He grew up in the independent branch of the Stone Campbell movement and moved to the Disciples during his seminary years. I'm looking forward to hearing about more detail about that transition. Spending most of his vocational life serving as a chaplain, pastor, clinical educator. He has lived in Washington, Tennessee, Nova Scotia, Indiana, Colorado, Missouri, and Kentucky. Ken is married to Daleen Bassmaster, a chaplain at Baptist Health in Kentucky. And both have been members of Central since 2021. Ken is also the author of a series of fiction books for young adults. McCullough Sports Stories. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ken McCullough.
Thank you, Tim. If I start staring darts out here at anybody, it's probably going to be David. Yeah, right behind you. Glad to do that. In case any of you are wondering, I was up late last night. Wore my Seattle Mariners shirt in honor of the now participating American League Championship Seattle Mariners. Yay! I was said this to a couple people, most recently last night, and another shout out to Josh Santana for a wonderful celebration. Thank you for being who you are and for letting us celebrate with you. But one of the things that I was saying when asked if I was ready to do this is basically no. But I had, if I said everything that I had reflected upon to prepare for this, we'd be here a really long time. And I wasn't sure that any of you would be up to that, and I would need probably a whole tankard of coffee myself to get through it. So I'm going to look at my notes every now and then, but I'm not planning on giving you everything I got. It's my, I guess it's my privilege as a speaker this morning to invite some dialogue if you so desire. I actually enjoy that probably more than I do speaking on my own for the, I've been told 20 minutes. It may evolve to a little bit longer than that, but I have models from previous folks, so I'll go with that. Anyway, if you have comments or questions or something that's not real clear about what I have to say about myself and my journey and some of the sides that I'll throw in, then please, jump in there. Raise a hand or even shout out. I don't get what you're saying here. Can you be clearer? Whatever. Or if you have a specific question, I'm glad to entertain that as well. I do have mixed feelings about doing this. It is more my style to sit in a small group and do this kind of sharing. So,
You get in a circle.
if you would like to get into a circle, David, I'll allow you to orchestrate that. Get out your shepherd's crook and make it happen. And if the inspiration strikes as we get along further, just raise your hand. We'll do that. When I first came to Kentucky, which was in 2000, well, I came here a couple times, but when I first came here to live in 2009, I was in the shall I retire stage or not. I stayed in that stage for almost 12 years. And referred to myself as semi-retired. This past year, I have finally been able to say out loud, I am retired, and you can congratulate me on that I can say it out loud now. But when I first came here in 2009, I didn't know if I'd be working at all. I came here as a pastor's spouse, and was going to be okay with that, but I also belong to a a specified profession in ministry, which is clinical pastoral education. Some of you know what that is, some of you do not, perhaps, but if you don't, it could be one of those questions. But I came here with that pedigree, so I thought probably there would be some things to do, and there were. And I'll just speak to them briefly at this point. The first is that I was asked to do the pastoral care course at Lexington Theological Seminary for a year during their transition to online curriculum for the most part. And during that, I was asked to do two courses. One, a introduction to pastoral care for students, if all students needed to take that course. And that was fine. I would give myself something like a B for that in terms of my own ability to convey the information I wanted them all to have. The second course was up to me. They said, oh, you just pick something and teach it. And I discerned for a bit, and I thought, well, why don't I talk about transitions? Because I was in one, a big one. And so I did. I prepared a curriculum on the topic of transitions. And I refer you to my sources for that if any of you are interested. If you want to copy this down, go ahead. There's a book that I was introduced to a number of years ago from William Bridges called Transitions. And I made use of that in the course. I also made use of a course or of a book authored by the primarily writer, but Judith Bjorst, who wrote a book called Necessary Losses. And I highly recommend that if you want to get a in-depth but straight, at the same time straightforward overview of psychoanalytic understanding of the growth, change, and grief process, and the pattern of developmental growth through adulthood. So I'm going to draw on some of that as I talk today, and it helped me to think through my own life in terms of what the major transitions have been. I'm not going to be able to touch in depth about very many of them. That's part of my in a way, apology to you, but in a way, the apology is really, you don't have to listen to me for the next 3 hours, because it would take probably at least that much time. I'm going to do this somewhat in a linear way, but with some caveats. One of the key learnings that I have as a professional educator was the importance of learning, owning, and integrating my own story. And the premise there is, how can I be in a position where I can be of help to people in crisis if I don't know anything about, or if I don't integrate the self that is providing that presence with people. And that is the premise upon which clinical pastoral education works. Know yourself in order to be the tool that will help other people and engage other people where they are. If you don't have that, you just can't do the work very well. So, to wit, I'm going to give you a little bit about my family of origin history. Not because you need to know so much about that, but so I can practice in a way or show you in a way what I mean by the importance of knowing the self as the tool of care for others. My parents were the youngest children of their respective families. And I was obviously the oldest of my parents. Well, not obviously, you didn't know that. I knew that. I was their first child. They were married in 1942, and you may recall, those of you who don't study a lot of history will know what 1942 meant historically in this country. They were married in the middle of a war, and at a time when no one was certain how that war was going to end. It's hard for us to, I think, put ourselves in that place of not knowing, although maybe today there are some ways in which we can see those parallels, at least emotionally. We are in the sense of being in the middle of something and we don't know how it's going to turn out. And that's what it was like to be, I think, married in 1942. I have often wondered, and I'll share this reflection with you, what it really felt like for them to go through not just a beginning marriage, but the cultural context in which they found themselves. I wondered if they were decided to get married because they were hopeful people that things were going to change. Were they in a lot of denial about how things might turn out? Or were they just not wanting to postpone their expression of their romantic and sexual natures at that time? I mean, the personal dimension of relational change and development, was that predominant there, and the events in the world outside maybe didn't mean a whole lot? It's hard to think of that at our age, most of our ages, but at 22, you think about when you were 22, 23 years old, what was your perception, sense of what the wider world was about and what your place in it was? Not an easy question, perhaps, to answer. In context for them, my dad had polio as a child, so he was not, for a variety of reasons, eligible to be in the military. But I had two uncles, one who was on a Navy ship in South Pacific during those years, and was actually had his boat shot out from under him. He was injured and in a hospital ship for a long time. He survived fine and was actually ended up, well, he didn't end up that way, but he happened to be my favorite uncle, so we had a pretty good relationship over the years. My other uncle was also very involved in the war as a Navy commander who had a lot of responsibilities that would have meant he made decisions that affected thousands of people and sometimes that meant their deaths. So I had those kind of connections in that history as well. So here we have this young couple, and they're deciding to postpone having children, I guess, or not. What was their rationale for that? How come they made that decision? And they made it probably a little over 2 years after their marriage. I was born on the cusp of the baby boom in October of 1945. And that meant that they would be making a decision, if they made one, in somewhat near the early part of 1945. So a time when post D-Day, they may have been able to see that the world was heading in the direction of being a safer place to raise children than what it had seemed before. That having been said, and I kind of believe this with my heart and soul too, that first children, I don't know how many of you are first children, that we are the experiments that our parents have made. And there are ways of stereotyping all the different roles of first children, middle children, and last children, if you have the proverbial 3 or more. But I felt like an experiment. That's maybe more important. And in some ways, later would feel like I was in some ways raising my own parents. They were good people, loved my mom and dad, they loved me, but we were a trial and error proposition. Transitions occur a lot when we are faced with some crisis or another, or some major change, sometimes imposed upon us, sometimes ones we have a voice in. The early ones that the early transitions we go through, usually we don't have a lot of choices about. Bjorst, in her book Necessary Losses, talks about the very first transition we all go through that involves a lot of grief, a lot of loss, is actually the moment of birth. When you move from your mother's womb to that cold and bleak world out there that you don't know anything about, and you had no choice of being there. And the grief you feel, it's true, it's not articulate, you don't articulate about it, but it's that feeling experience of being in a new place and not having the foggiest idea about what you're about. And eventually, it's a loss of comfort and a loss of warmth. And we need to deal with that some way. That's what the psychologists often will tell us. We need to cope with those early sense of loss, even if we didn't feel exactly what they were. So that begins pretty early in human experience, that sense of transition, change, loss, and grief. I can pinpoint 4 other elements in my early childhood that were also those kind of transitional experiences. I didn't I didn't spend hours crying or even reflecting about any of those changes, not that at least I'm aware of, but they were important as I look back on them. I will just name them briefly, and I have a story about each, but I'm not going to tell it. One was my first grief, which was the death of my little black dog that I grew up with in early childhood. I was 4 years old when that dog was hit by a car in front of my house. visceral memory of holding that dog on my lap in the front yard. And experiencing that kind of loss at that age. It stuck with me more than probably any other memory of my 4-year-old period. Although coinciding with that in some ways was my parents moved to a new house, the house that would become the place that I lived up through my high school graduation. So it was a movement from a lot of back and forth and wandering unsettledness to the place where I would spend most of my childhood and teen years. The other major transition, and I don't mind if you laugh and she wouldn't either if she were here, my sister was born at, again, around that 4-year-old period. And I love my sister too. We have a wonderful adult relationship, but I'm sure I just regretted like hell when she was born. I don't have any great memories of any kind of real acting out of anger or that sort of thing, but I'm pretty sure I had a lot of strong feelings about that. And sharing your life, if you're number one, letting go of that place where you have to share it is a grief and a loss and a transition. And finally, what else happens when you're 4 or 5 years old? You go to school. Love those big blocks. Ones you play with when you're in kindergarten. At least we did back in the day. I'm sure some of you remember those blocks. Well, I also was, again, there's my situation where my parents are having a hard time deciding whether to send me to school. Since I was born in October, they had a choice. They could hold me back another year, and that would have really helped my basketball career, let me tell you. But I was a little precocious, I guess, or probably my mom wanted or needed me to be out of her hair for a while, since she was going to have a new infant there to take care of, and it would be easier to let me be in school during the day. Plus, if I had a say in this, it would have been because my friend Dickie, who lived 2 houses down away, was 3 months older than me, and he was definitely going to school. So what could be the problem? Wahoo, I'm going to school. And that began a interesting educational career. Dickie was important for a number of reasons in my early life, but I'll just mention one, which is our common discovery of athletics. I had 2 major influences there. First was my dad, who was a championship table tennis player. He would never call it ping pong. That was a Parker Brothers addition to the vocabulary. But we had it wouldn't be a McCullough household, at least an Art McCullough household, if there wasn't a table tennis table in the basement. And there was in our house. It had a lot of hazards. There were wash tubs and stuff at one end, and a big furnace with all kinds of ductwork and so forth on the other hand, and that was my end of the table. That was the way we bonded initially. So that was my introduction to sport. Dickie was my introduction, and he and the other neighborhood boys, to team sports like football, the kind where you run around the neighborhood, run up and down the neighborhood, and you go left behind the black Chevy, and I'll get you there. Those kind of things. So, yeah, that was my introduction. I have, and I was gonna read this, but I don't think I will. By the time we got to about 5th and 6th grade, then Dick and I were terrors in the schoolyard. We had transferred from a larger elementary school to one of those baby boom schools that were going up at that time. And so we were the only 5th and 6th graders on the campus of the school. So we were big cheese. And the thing I'm not going to read is a sports. Dick fancied himself a bit of a sports writer. He wrote this. Well, maybe I will read it. It's not that long. This year, Fairmont got off to a bad start, losing their first football game 12-0. In the second game, Ken McCullough intercepted a Jefferson pass and went 8 yards for the touchdown, winning the game for Fairmont 6-0. Fairmont lost the next game because Jefferson's guard intercepted the pass and went all the way for a touchdown. The next game was won for Fairmont by Dick Farman intercepting and going for the touchdown. In the 5th game, the score was 8-6 when Dick Farman caught a pass thrown by Ken McCullough for the touchdown. The final score was 12-8. In the 6th game and championship playoff game, Fairmont failed to score and lost the game. No, I'm sorry, I went ahead of myself. 6th game, Fairmont failed to score and lost the game. And in the last game, the playoff game, Fairmont won 6-0 by Ken McCullough catching a pass thrown by Dick Farman for the TD. Yay! Thank you. The football team's 2 captains were Ken McCullough and Dick Farman. The less said about baseball and basketball, or the better. We played High Point and Jefferson. And in the West Seattle track meet, Ken McCullough scored Fairmont's only 3 points by coming in second in the softball throw. Now, I doubt if this classic bit of reporting received much national recognition that year, but it at least is an accurate bit of 12-year-old narcissism that comes alive for me when I reflect on it. Clearly, prowess in athletics had become a major path to self-esteem for me. It was a questionable path. It's already mentioned in Tim's introduction that I grew up in the independent branch of the Stone Campbell movement. In my family, growing up in church was an extension of family life. I played, I assume that the years that all these many righteous church folk only had my best interests at heart, with some adult help, no doubt, I had begun to wonder about my own righteousness. And though simplistic for sure, what I had been taught was that if a person wasn't good or righteous enough, he or she certainly would not inherit the kingdom of God. And what so slowly wore on me was that if I didn't turn my 12-year-old self around, I would be going instead to that lake of fire that burns forever and is reserved for the devil and his angels. This time of life was referred to, some of you know this, as the time of accountability, when you are to choose which side you are going to be on. And the church family acknowledged that and encouraged us to acknowledge our own sinfulness, confess our belief in Christ, be baptized, and take our rightful place in the community. And I can remember very clearly sitting in the back pew of church one Sunday evening. We had church at least twice a day in those days. And having this strong conviction that if I didn't stand up at the invitation of the minister at the end of the service and walk forward and take my place in front of the congregation and repeat the words of the Great Confession, and then surely follow that up by being immersed, I would be in jeopardy with things going forward. So I did that. And I took that born again, athletic, fantasy, emerging, sexual, almost teenage self. I wrote all that down, that's what I'm saying. To Madison Junior High School in the fall of 1957. What can I say about my schooling? I have other stories. I'm not following my time. Will you wave at me when I have 5 minutes?
You know, you need to jump ahead a little.
See, that's the thing. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. The things that I'm jumping ahead of, what I want to say just in a kind of general paragraph is foundations are important. And those early life's experiences are forming and deforming for all of us. And I spent a lot of time with them because of that, in order to understand more clearly who I am and what my place currently is in the world, even though I have gone very different directions in some ways from what those foundations are. I'll tell you what I'm skipping over. I'm skipping over political digressions, which there are many to report on. I'm skipping over the what-ifs of life. What if I had chosen this and not chosen that? What if I had gone to a different school or asked out a different girlfriend? Whatever, those kind of what-ifs that we all have. Skipping over church youth group, which was in some ways very formative. And I want to share this one piece, and this is partly for you, Josh. What I remember most from my early manifestations of church life and that struggle with my own lack of righteousness, what I remember most was the singing. In a sense, we sang our faith, and that was very foundational for me. For a long while, the words didn't matter. I learned to sing from my soul, and in the blending of my voice with others, make meaning beyond words. Eventually, that was not enough, and I longed for words that would combine with music to echo, as one source says, a more profound hallelujah. I still struggle with hymns or gospel tunes that are blatantly or repeatedly non-inclusive in their language, or ones that stress a too narrow theological theme. However, even there, profound moments can arise. Singers will tell you that they live for those few rare moments when sound and text become more than they are, and something more akin to light and spirit happens. It is in such moments that I am most likely to truly believe in God. I graduated from high school in '63. I chose to go to Linfield College in Oregon. That's a story in itself. Why did I do that? I'm not going to tell you. Suffice to say that what was going on for me was a struggle in some ways to discover what, and these are the words I would have used at the time, what God's will is for my life. Thinking I had discovered that in part, I transferred to Milligan College, which is located in Northeast Tennessee. Some of you know this. It's the only independent Christian church supported liberal arts college in the country. And I thought it would be the ideal place for me to work out the matters of faith in a supportive atmosphere. I've worked to some degree, but there's lots of there's more stories there as well. I found myself not so much academically, but in the friendships, full sessions, after-hour stuff, and through music and theater. And my athletic career had evolved into being a tennis player and longer much of a team sport guy, although I always loved doubles better than singles. I was married to my first wife, Mitzi, in 1968, a famous year for many different reasons, not all good. And I embarked there on basically what I would call a roller coaster marriage for the next 11 years. At the same time, it's also the time I transferred to Vanderbilt University. And in spite of Tim's invitation, I'm not going to tell you very much about why. I will simply say it was what I needed to do, and it was a way that I discovered that I could broaden my sense of place in the world and my place in the community of God's people. And I found a home in the disciples that I no longer could own in the independent church. Significant transitions that followed involved a lot of change, a lot of hard work on self and so forth. I entered my first units of clinical pastoral education as a student. I began a parish career that lasted about 8 years, starting in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is clearly another story that needs to be told. Moved from Halifax to Columbus, Indiana, so back to this country in the bicentennial year of 76. And there I went through the valley of my, well, at least the first valley of my life, emotionally and grief-wise. During the 3 years I was in Columbus at the church there, my brother died, the drowning accident back at Puget Sound. I had facilitated with him in his marriage 2 years before. His wife was pregnant, and she gave birth to my nephew, who's still living and is still a important family connection for me. And besides that, I had 3 remaining grandparents who died during those 3 years. My sister's first husband, Jack, died of cancer as a young man, and I lost my job that was of significance to me at the time, and entered a period of sort of wandering employment, and my marriage fell apart. All of that happened in those 3 years, that provided an extraordinarily significant transition for me as I went back into clinical pastoral education after 8 years away from it, became a clinical educator. That was all happened in Denver in the late 70s, early 80s. I entered a period of about 11 years of single parenting at that time too. I jumped over the adoption birth of my first 2 children, both international adoptions from Korea and Bangladesh. And they were with me during all of that time. And I moved to my first professional hospital-based job in St. Joseph, Missouri, in 1981. Was there for 4 years, and then my ideal job was advertised in one of our publications that we read for such things. And I applied and was accepted as a chaplain, clinical educator, supervisor for Children's Hospital in Seattle. So a full circle kind of thing for me in terms of transitioning back in some ways home, although I would argue with the famous writer, you can't go home again in some ways. There were lots of ways in which that was not my old home anymore.
Ian,
Yes.
all this time with these deaths and divorce and all of this, was that not a period of crisis of faith, or did you maintain your faith throughout that?
Well, that's an excellent question. What evolved for me was a different understanding of God, but it wasn't a loss of faith. It was, I would call it a maturing of faith. It didn't come easily, and I struggled, and I did some arguing and fighting with God, and I think came through those with a more mature, if not stronger faith, in that I arrived at the place where, which was less black and white, where answers were not as clear as I had thought they ought to be, and to embrace that. Say, okay, this is the world, this is the real world in which we live, and it's full of all kinds of crap. How are we going to deal with that? And one way is to deny, and one way is to victimize yourself. And I have people in my life that have done that. But the other way is to embrace what is and make sense of it in the best ways that you can.
So you've never had a crisis of faith?
Well, I would call that a crisis, but it's not a crisis of a loss of faith. It's not like I suddenly decided there is no God and there's no way to cope with that kind of
You never
immense
felt
change.
abandoned by God?
Not really, not really. I can see us having a further conversation. But as you pointed out, I have other transitions to and limited time. Are we done at less than 5 minutes?
We probably should be,
Okay. Well, let me say really quickly, because I haven't even got to my second life yet. My second life really started in 1990. And that was a banner year, one in which I got married again after 11 years of singlehood. And a world in which I moved through vocationally through major certification hurdles. I published a couple of articles in Disciple magazine and also which was a big deal back then, not so much now, and in the Journal of Pastoral Care, my professional organization's journal. So it was a big year, and a new life going forward that had its ups and downs too. And a major one was the birth and then immediate death of our first child, Daylene's and my first child. And the death of my parents, the death of Daylene's brother. Those are all marker events that were very difficult to go through. And I would say, maybe this is another answer to your question, David, I am, like many of you, I think, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And that's part of who I am. It's not the only part, but it's part, and a significant part. Church's role in all of that is another question. I was going to struggle with some, but I will not. I have had, as I mentioned, a number of interim positions since moving here. From briefly, just speak them. Children's to generalized sort of ministry, which involved counseling practice and more time as an educator in other places, and a couple of interim churches, and then eventually led to a full-time position in another hospital in Seattle. And after that is when we get to the place where I'm getting ready to move to Lexington and begin this semi-retirement, running around doing different things at different places. those involved, just in case you're interested, I'll name them again. The first was the LTS thing. Next was the Hospice of the Bluegrass, where I was for a year. St. Joseph Hospital, Hebrew Union College, an all-Jewish education program. Did I say St. Joseph? St. Joseph, the VA here in Lexington, then the VA in Louisville, and Baptist Hospital in Louisville. Those were all interim kind of positions that I held for a while. And finally, I'm getting there, my second career, I guess it's not really second career, my second vocational direction was to get into my writing. And that's been an important piece to me to be able to spend more time doing that. I did a little show and tell here.
Are we free to look at these books?
People may look at them. I'm not twisting any arms. If you want to purchase them, I'm not opposed to that. But they have become my way of contributing, I think, in some, to me, there have been important ways of sharing what I know about coming of age, growing up, taking on things in the world, and partly through the window of sports. I've titled them Season 1 through 4 so far. I've just finished 5 and I'm getting ready to publish it. And thematically, I try to integrate a lot of the sort of struggles, cultural struggles that are part of growing up as well. For example, one of the books takes racism on as a major dynamic. Another deals with I shouldn't say deals with, but includes an important figure who's a gay baseball player. And so I take on the homosexuality thing. There are other themes. That's enough. If you're interested, take a look, and I'll be glad to sell
Mention
it.
that they're not under your name.
They are not under my name. David couldn't find them under my name when he Googled me.
Jim McCullough is what I look for.
Yeah. They're under the name K. Arthur. Arthur was my dad's name and my middle name. So in a way, it's my name, but it doesn't include my last name, so the author's is K. Arthur. And you can find me Googled under that name.
Have you turned 80 yet, or is it yet to come in October? Have you turned 80 yet, or is it yet to
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Marker, I had that marker time last week.
Okay. Happy.
So yeah, you can congratulate me in making it this far. My family got together. I give my younger daughter credit. I haven't even talked about, and here I haven't even talked about the birth of my younger children. That was part of that second life thing, you know? I have 2 younger children. They're both well into their 20s now. But my younger daughter took this on as her major contribution. She created, or with the help of friends and the rest of the family, a Lord of the Rings party for me. I had read Tolkien to my kids growing up. It was part of what we did at bedtime every night for probably several years with both groups of kids, both the older and the younger ones. So it was part of our DNA to have that kind of experience with the Lord of the Rings.
May you live 100 years, may you drink 1,000 beers.
Yeah, there we go.
Faster, you bad boy.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
I wonder where we were going with that. I thought that was going to be a recreation of a Bilbo song or something.
Can we get some road in a second? How it runs down?
So that's it. I had a couple of poems to read too, David.
That's a big one.
But based on what we've just been talking
You want to
about,
read a poem?
I won't. Well, they're edgy poems.
That'd be the epilogue.
Oh, geez. I'll read one. I'll tell you, I can either do that or I can sing you one of my hymns. What do you want?
Read an edgy poem.
Okay,
I like edginess at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday.
okay.
There you go.
You want the one about my disintegrated marriage or the one about the death of my child? I said they were edgy.
Didn't say it right.
Okay, here we go. There is a pain in me, a hole in the bottom, the feeling me cannot yet touch. You are the shadowy projection still of a dream I cannot capture, and I am afraid of losing what hurt cries never was. Conscious deep breathing does not fill the hole, but becomes another ephemeral sigh of aching loneliness. Tears that once made hope one now fall on indifferent ears. The game, if game it was, takes two to play. What say you then of love winding its way along Calvary roads, through gardens of Gethsemane flowers, at last to an empty tomb? Must a man enter his mother's womb a second time to be born?
You are a poet.
Thank you.
Well, pick up a book and look at it. Would you recommend one for middle schoolers?
Young middle schoolers will have no problem with book one. The language of the season beyond that, it's a little edgier. And keeping culturally, there are words that some parents would frown upon. But the kids would